Ancestors podcast, and I'm thrilled today to have an expert in Scots Irish genealogy. It's as hard to find an expert in Scots Irish genealogy as it is to find your ancestor's immigration date if you have a Scots Irish ancestor. A lot of people love talking about Pennsylvania Germans, and they're a great ethnic group. But the Scots Irish are also a great ethnic group, and it's really hard to find experts on that. So I'm really thrilled to welcome Justin Hauser to the podcast, who is going to teach us about the Scots Irish, his top tips for researching, and tell us a little bit about how he got interested in researching this very elusive group of ancestors for most of us. Justin, welcome to the podcast. I'd love if you could tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you got started with Scots Irish research.
Well, sure. Thank you. My name, of course, is Justin Hauser, and I live in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. By profession, I'm an attorney, so that's where I spend most of my time, which is actually somewhat helpful for Scots Irish genealogy because learning your way around the system of court records is one of the key sources we'll be talking about. I've been practicing law for probably about almost 15 years now. But I've been interested in genealogy a lot longer than that. I've been researching my own family history since I was a pretty young kid, with the help of my grandparents and others who encouraged me in that pursuit. Early on, began to discover, like most Pennsylvanians, I have a mix of many different ethnicities in my ancestry, and one of those that has a particularly big share, probably second only to the Pennsylvania German, is the Scots Irish. And as you said, Denise, they're a very difficult group to research for a number of reasons. I don't know that I would declare myself an expert on the subject, but I guess I'm somebody who's done a fair amount of research in my own lineages and become familiar with some record sets, and I'm always eager to learn more and have experienced some successes along the way. So if I can share some of that, I'd be happy to do that today.
Oh, that would be great. And you're a true Pennsylvanian if you're part German, Pennsylvania German, and part Scots Irish. I think that's how I know you're like actually a Pennsylvania native. It's like
Yes.
it's the required ethnicity, if you go back anytime before the 20th century. What is your you mentioned court records.
Yes.
As a lawyer, not sure if you want to go in that direction yet. So why don't we back up actually for a second and talk about who were the Scots Irish, so we get our audience straight on who we're talking about, because you and I seem to know who they are, but maybe somebody listening isn't sure if they have a Scots Irish ancestor in their background and who these Scots Irish are.
Sure. Well, they certainly go by a number of names, and if you spend any amount of time in internet fora working on their genealogy, sometimes you get into some heated debates about which names are more or less correct. But some of the folks out there, you might have heard of them as the Scots Irish, the Scotch Irish, the Ulster Scots, the Irish Protestants, the Irish Presbyterians, any number of descriptions like that. But who they were, we start with the Scots part, I suppose, is how we can explain their origin best. They started off as individuals who lived in the bordering region between lowland Scotland and the north of England, primarily in lowland Scotland, which is the southern part of Scotland, and where it borders the very northern counties of England. And those were very lawless areas, very unsettled areas at the time that they made their first moves, which was in the 1600s and even into the early 1700s. During that period of history, and I'm really abbreviating this here, but England was making large efforts to bring the island of Ireland under its firm domain and as part of its royal government and political system. And so, as a part of that, in the early 1600s, the process was undertaken to take the northern part of Ireland and to what they called establish plantations for that area. And this northern part of Ireland was called Ulster, and it consists of 9 counties in that area, 6 of which are now in Northern Ireland, and 3 of which are in the Republic of Ireland. But the idea was to plant this area with settlers, and the people who were involved in this were pretty high officials called undertakers. And a
Mm.
lot of them went to these areas in the low part of Scotland and the northern part of England, where these troublesome borderers, as they were often called, were located, and they encouraged them and resettled them to the north of Ireland. So that's how it all got started in the first decades of the 1600s. So you had these Scots people settling in Northern Ireland. Now, just a few decades before all that started, there had been the Protestant Reformation had come to Scotland. And over the decades, the Church of Scotland became more or less established, and it had adopted a Presbyterian form of government, which is a series of doctrines that were emphasized during the Reformation. But the church was ruled by successively higher courts of elders and deacons. So you had your local presbytery, and then you had your regional presbytery, and then you had your overarching session. That's why they're called Presbyterians. So these people who were being transported and transplanted into Northern Ireland were generally of this Presbyterian faith, unlike many of the native Irish who were Catholic, or the upper classes of the English who were generally Anglican.
Mhm.
To abbreviate the history a little bit, during the middle 1600s, you had all kinds of civil wars going on. You
Mhm.
had a lot of war in Northern Ireland. You had a rebellion by the native Irish, and a decimation of these Scots settlers. But toward the end of the century, there were more famines in Scotland, and more upheaval there. There was a political revolution in England in the late 1600s. So during the 1690s and early 1700s, you see a lot more of these Scots crossing over into Ulster and settling there. And that's, you probably have more coming in the later 1600s than you do even in the early 1600s. But once they're there in Northern Ireland, these Scots Presbyterians, they live there for about a generation or two or maybe three, and all kinds of problems are developing for them in Northern Ireland. There are different laws that are passed that favor Anglicans over Presbyterians. They lose a lot of their ability to hold positions even in government, and various other rights. They are tenants. The rents are continually being increased. They can barely keep up with those payments. They're dependent on the flax crops, the harvests, to meet their expenses. And in the years when those fail, they're really in a bad way. So there are all these economic, political pressures, some of which are somewhat religiously oriented as well. So by the late 17 teens, 1718 is the date when the first group of them is considered to have come not to Pennsylvania, but to New Hampshire. But that sort of started to open the floodgates of immigration of these people to the American colonies. And from 1718 up until the Revolutionary War in 1775, you get the biggest influx of these people, which has been estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands coming across. And then even after the revolution, in the 50 or so years after that, you still have a pretty steady trickle of these people settling in, especially in Pennsylvania. So they're people with origins in, just to recap, they're people with origins in Scotland and the bordering areas of England. They have a fierce independent spirit because of living in this lawless area. They have a
Mhm.
mistrust of authority, both from their time in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, strong desire for independence, strong belief in the doctrines of the Presbyterian Church and the organization of the Presbyterian Church. They want to be farmers in their own right. They come to us as Irish from Ireland, but with just having been there a few generations, and so that's why we get the concept of them as the Scots Irish or the Ulster Scots because
Mhm.
of that transition that they went through before they got here.
A wonderful summary. I think that is perfect. That's the most the most succinct summary I've heard of this group of people, because the history is complicated and it's
Hmm.
long and it's gruesome at points. It's like really, really not a nice history. And you understand why they immigrated, that the opportunity in Ulster, in Northern Ireland really wasn't there for them. If they had the opportunity to come here, why they took it, despite, maybe not much available for them here either. I mean, it isn't like they had money to just establish their own farms and things like that, but at least they had the opportunity to get some land, or at least be on land that they could tenant, if I'm understanding things correctly. So,
Yeah,
what percentage would you say of that Pennsylvania population, like we have the 1790 census is the first one, that we have. What percentage would you say of that population would have been of the Scots Irish origin in Pennsylvania? Are we talking
that's a good
50%? Like I always debate with myself how many you think there were.
Right. Well, obviously, this, as we all know, if we've been doing genealogy for any length of time, the 1790 census tells us very little about
Yeah,
the details of the people who were
it's true. You
recorded
have to
on it.
guess by the surname. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But when you think about it, and when you think about their settlement patterns too, after they came to Pennsylvania, and I should say that certainly not everybody, not all the Scots Irish left Northern Ireland. There's still a large population of descendants of these folks who stayed there and lived there, but there are a ton of them here.
Yeah.
By 1790, you think about the way that Pennsylvania was sort of being settled. You have the ring counties around Philadelphia that had been largely taken up by the Quakers and by the English, maybe a few Germans. Then you have the secondary counties that sort of go in a semicircle around that we call the German counties, because the
Yeah.
influx of the Pennsylvania Germans, they took over that area and settled it. And then you have the Scots Irish that pushed out beyond that to the frontiers in basically another arc that runs from southwestern Pennsylvania up to maybe parts of northeastern Pennsylvania, but certainly across the middle of the state, they were the first settlers. So,
Mhm.
and then of course down the Shenandoah valleys and down even into Kentucky and Tennessee and places like that. But I mean, as far as a percentage, I would say they they were probably at least a third.
Yeah.
Somewhere
Wow.
probably between a third and a half would be my
Yeah.
guess, just based on their predominance in that big swath of the state at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that's been my guess too. And I think it's so hard because of the Revolutionary War, and the anybody that was loyal to England kind of skedaddled,
Yeah,
it wasn't really welcoming to them if they were super loyalists. So, how many of those people was it? And so it's frustrating just having that first census after the war's all over and not really having a count. So, and I think this is a good transition to why it's so challenging to research this group, and why we don't have an exact number is because we really don't have records of when they arrived, correct? Like we know that they
right.
got here, but we don't know, exactly on what ships and on what dates, unlike with later immigrants.
Right. Yeah, that's a big struggle. Unlike later immigrants, after about 1820, you have the passenger customs lists, which, or theoretically at least, record everybody who was coming into our ports. Before that, for the Germans, because the government in Pennsylvania was somewhat suspicious of them, of course, you have a separate set of oaths and arrivals that they took. The Scots Irish, on the other hand, were coming here. They were already subjects of Britain when they came, so they didn't have to naturalize. They didn't have to do anything particularly special, and so we don't have many ships lists for them. There are a few stray lists, I think, that have turned up here and there. One thing that has been that I have uncovered, there are a few periods for which we can get a sense of some of these immigrants, because in the 1740s and in the early 1770s, the first 2 or 3 years, the I believe it was the mayor of Philadelphia kept ledgers, and they probably kept them for other years, but I don't know that they've survived. But ledgers of people who were sworn to indenture before him or before his office. And so some of these were published in the, I think it's the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and some are in published form. But if your ancestor came and was indentured, I have found people of the same surname as some of my families, and it was a pretty rare surname, but I did find them listed in these indenture records that it says they came from. Some of them even say from, for example, County Antrim, Ireland. They arrived on the ship so and so, and they were indentured this day to this person for a term of so many years, and so that is probably the best you're going to get for an arrival. And unfortunately, they seem to survive only for certain subsets of years and only for the people who were sworn to indentureship before the
Mhm.
mayor of Philadelphia.
It's a genealogical gold mine. You got the date they came, the ship, the name. Yeah, I haven't had any luck with indenture records myself. You recently were one of the speakers at the Ohio Genealogical Society conference, and I'd love if you could share, maybe a few of the tips that you shared with that audience about researching the Scots Irish. I don't want to take away from what, the OGS conference and all that, but it's always tantalizing to hear some new tips for researching this group.
Well, sure, and I hope that they'll be well served wherever they may be broadcast to. So, uh, that far back in time, as I had mentioned, court records, but one essential set of government records for the Scots Irish are tax records. I love tax records for early Pennsylvania research, and I can get pretty passionate about them. And I think some people are afraid to delve into some of these kinds of sources because they're unfamiliar with them. A lot of them are not indexed. A lot of them are on places like Family Search. If you know how to search the catalogs, you can find a lot of them for early Pennsylvania counties, or they could be in courthouses or libraries, things of that sort. But generally speaking, and they haven't all survived, but it seems like a lot of them have. About every year, the assessors of the various townships and boroughs in each county took an assessment of each person who owned property in that township, but also the single freeman who had a trade or occupation, as well as people who were renting and had an occupation or something, a cow or a horse or something that was taxable. So you get a pretty complete list of who was there. Of course, it was only the males over, generally speaking, over 21 years of age, but it's still a very good resource. And using these tax records, you can sort of intuit where other records are not there. You can follow somebody back. You can see when they left one particular place and moved to another place. Sometimes it's noted on there that perhaps they died or they moved. Sometimes you get a list of, let's say, an adult male of a particular surname, and then you have two or three single freeman males of that surname in that township. It's not proof that they're his sons, but it's a pretty good clue that might be what that is. Based on when people come on to the tax list, you can determine perhaps within a few years of when either they immigrated or were released from their indenture. You can determine approximately when they became 21 years of age, so you can start establishing these family groups. So the tax records are extremely valuable to figure out who was actually there and what they were doing. In the other court records, obviously, the Scots Irish were looking for land. So you want to look at deeds, both when they bought land and when they sold it. Something unique, somewhat unique to the Scots Irish is they settled in those parts of Pennsylvania where there were very few people already settled, and some of them, the Native American titles to the land had not yet been extinguished, and there were some incidents, let's say, surrounding some of that early settlement in the old days. The land office of Pennsylvania could not keep up with a lot of these people. So in the 1760s, they started a new system of issuing what are called land warrants or permission to survey these tracts where these people had basically squatted, and they issued what are called warrants to accept. which are basically directives from the land office. This person says he lives here. If he makes application and nobody else has claimed it, then we will give him permission to have it surveyed and start the process to put it in his name. A lot of the Scots Irish are the people that you're finding because they were already there at the time that the procedure opened up for them. So
Okay.
looking at the land warrants and that whole system of land warrants and patents, you find a lot of their early settlement. You tie that with the tax records, the deed records, probate records. Scots Irish are pretty good at leaving their assets to people in their wills or their estates, so you can build family groups that way. One of the other things that's very beneficial, the quarter sessions records of the courts, who laid out road petitions and petitioned for that,
Mm.
who did things as far as criminal court, civil court jurors, anything that puts somebody in a particular place at a particular time. You sort of fill in their whole backstory year by year, make sure you're following the right person and you're connecting them to the right family. And then I would also say beyond those types of civil and court records, church records, if you can find them. Early Presbyterian records are spotty, but there are levels at the session or records at the session level. There are some records of early congregations of members at least, and I have actually found in a couple of congregations it listed in there in the 1700s the place in Ireland, the presbytery that they transferred from. So I was able to get a
Nice.
parish of origin for some of my Wilson ancestors that way. It gave
Oh,
us particular the parish of Cumber in County Derry is where they
wow.
transferred their membership from. So
Oh, congratulations. I said, "Oh," when you said Wilson, because that's such a common surname.
yes,
Now yeah,
yes.
so that must have been a challenge, and congratulations. That's a huge win. That's a huge win. And
That
when you
was
get
a great victory,
yeah.
and I think that's the best tip in Scots Irish is be persistent, patient, and celebrate the small victories because this is not you're not going to find unless somebody's done it. You're not going to find it all spilled out for you somewhere. But you
Yeah.
trace that person, you find every record you can on that person, so you're sure you've got the right one, and then that leads you to hopefully something that'll tell you and help you narrow down their origin.
And it sounds like you did a lot of, analysis and collection, like, you weren't just looking at records and then closing the book. You were, taking notes, writing things down. I hate to say, like, as a lawyer building a case, but you were
Yeah, yeah.
definitely, yeah, writing everything down as you were researching. Do you have a preferred, research log or way that you take your research notes as you go along?
Well, I try if I can to get a copy or a scan, of course, of any item
Right.
that I find. The approach that I take on, especially on these early colonial folks, is to basically think, all right, what years did they live, and where exactly did they live during those years, and then try to look at any record that was created, no matter how tangential that might cover that area, and see if it mentions them at all. And then I gather that information, and I'm pretty old school. I put it all into well, either a Word document or I put it into the notes feature for that person in my genealogy software. And then I
Okay.
just try to organize it all chronologically and just follow it down through and see if there are gaps or see what it tells me, where else to look.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah,
And we
that's
should.
beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's the way to do it. Yeah, I'm old school too. I love like just pop open a Word document and write the title of the record,
Mhm.
what my impressions were, what I found in it, write a quick citation, yeah, take the images and then yeah, I have all that documentation together. I also use like spreadsheets or Notion, with the tables and the columns,
Oh
but
yeah.
I always feel like everything's so squished in there sometimes. Like it's great as a summary tool, but when it comes to doing, I'm with you on this colonial research. For some reason, even though there's less records, it seems more overwhelming. I don't know why.
Yeah, yeah. Every
I
word
it's
means something, and they don't
yeah,
always mean what we think they mean because it's so long ago.
exactly. I think that's it. I know I can't make any assumptions about what I'm looking at. I really have to take my time and make sure I study the history of the area and understand and the history of the records to know what I'm exactly looking at. I do want to mention that available to speak to genealogy societies. So if you're a genealogy society program person listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, keep Justin in mind for a
Thank
future
you.
speaker, 2024, 2025, to provide some of this and help people think through, their research. What else would you like to tell us about the Scots Irish? I don't your time's so valuable. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to make sure that you got a chance to say everything that you want to say about researching the Scots Irish.
Oh, well, thanks. It's so much fun. I mean, it's this is what I love to do in my whatever you want to call spare time. I don't know, but it's so much fun, and there's probably so many avenues this could go. A couple things that I think are worth mentioning too, and I know Denise, you this comes as no surprise to you. You're well aware of it, and anybody researching in Ireland generally is aware of it. But when Ireland became independent in the 1920s, there was a lot of fighting and a lot of war, and unfortunately, one of the casualties of that war was the destruction of the records treasury in Dublin, which
Yeah.
contained centuries of documents that would have been irreplaceable for research in Northern Ireland, and probably would have made our work a lot easier. But we don't have a lot of those documents, so we have to do a lot of workarounds, but you can still find a lot. And one of the things, well, a couple things that encourage me. I've been spending a lot of time lately just looking through digitized books from the 1800s. Uh, there were some histories of and family genealogies of the Scots Irish in Pennsylvania that William Eggle did, for example. And then there are the county history books that were done right after the American Centennial for a lot of different counties. And a lot of those books, and they're not primary documentation, but a lot of them have anecdotes or stories from people who were very old then, and who
Mm,
had some remembrance of at least the county, if not the town, where their Scots Irish ancestor originated. And it
mm,
may be in those books, and you may not find it anywhere else because the original records have been lost. So don't ignore what we consider those secondary 19th century family and county history books, because they can give you a lot of information about the origins of particular Scots Irish families. I've had
oh,
some success there. Found one of my Scots Irish ancestors' town of origin by a 1906 newspaper article about a family reunion. And they talked about that their ancestor, where he came from in Northern Ireland, my resides family, and that name is so rare there that I just about all of them are related. So I was able to zoom in on that area and
yeah.
reconstruct what I think is the family lineage to some degree there. And the other
Oh,
thing I would add is, if you can, there are a lot of good groups out there. There's one Facebook group that I've been following for a number of years now of Ulster Scots Irish genealogy on Facebook. And that's the primary use I have for Facebook now, is genealogy groups, I think. But they have done some things that have enlightened me. A lot of people over in Europe didn't move. They moved, but not as frequently as people in North America did. So we don't have a lot of 18th century records that show where everybody lived in Northern Ireland. But we
mhm.
do have 19th century and even early 20th century records. And there are some websites out there. And some of them are subscription based for more detail, some are not. But there are some websites out there where you can put in a surname, and it will show you the distribution and in which towns that surname is found in the 1850s, in the 1901 census of Ireland, and where you see it concentrated. That's a good place to then, if you have no clue at all where your family's from, and it's a relatively uncommon surname, maybe, you can see where it's concentrated. And then you can drill down into the surviving land records or the surviving archival records for that town, and you might just find your people that way. So that's something,
Mm,
thanks to the aggregating power of the internet, that we probably didn't have 10 or
yeah.
15 years ago, that is breaking down some walls.
Oh, that's a fantastic tip. So I'll put a link to that group in the show notes so people can find that Facebook group. I think I'm going to join it myself. That is also my only, or I should say, primary use for Facebook at this point is for genealogy. Yeah, and I think today, compared to 10, even 10 or 20 years ago, I think our level of research is so much deeper and broader than I think it used to be. We I think we really go after a lot more primary documents these days and are much more likely to reach out across the ocean to our kin on the other side for help and guidance to make the connections that we're trying to make. Any hope for the genealogists out there researching Scots Irish ancestors?
Well, keep at it and be patient and
Okay.
celebrate those small victories. And like I said, I've had at least two that I can think of where I actually have a parish of origin for an 18th century Scots Irish immigrant,
Yeah.
and I'm continuing to pursue the others. Takes a lot of work, but it's a great victory when you accomplish it. So don't give up, I guess is the biggest encouragement I can give.
That's a great encouragement. Don't give up. Don't give up on your Scots Irish ancestors. Don't give up on any of them, but especially this group. I know a lot of people just leave them in frustration. It's okay. Yeah, we're here for each other. We can continue on. All right.
That's
Well,
right.
Justin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been a real thrill to meet you, after seeing some of your work and having a chance to learn. And I picked up a few tips myself that I'm anxious now to apply. I'm eager to apply. And I look forward to us connecting in the future and hearing more of your victories as you continue on.
Well, thank you, Denise. It's been really nice speaking with you and meeting with you, and thank you for having me on the podcast today.